At 38, I never envisioned my life taking such a painful turn. My wife and I had been married for 16 years, building a life that included a teenage daughter we both cherished. Our marriage, like any long-term relationship, had its share of ups and downs, but I believed we had a strong foundation. That belief came crashing down on her birthday, a day I had hoped would be filled with joy and celebration. I had taken the day off, bought flowers, and felt a quiet excitement at the thought of surprising her with a special evening. But when I walked into our home, I knew immediately something was wrong. The hallway was littered with clothes, men's and women's clothes, scattered as if tossed aside in haste. My confusion turned to dread as I pieced together what was happening. I heard voices and unmistakable sounds of intimacy coming from our bedroom. It was like a punch to the gut, numbing me and rooting me in place. The reality of my wife's betrayal began to sink in, and my chest tightened with anger, hurt, and disbelief. The shock paralyzed me, but only for a moment. The realization of what I had walked into hit me like a wave, and I struggled to breathe. The sounds coming from the bedroom were unmistakable, confirming my worst fears. In a haze of disbelief and fury, I backed away and found myself in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch. My hands trembled as my mind raced. This wasn't just any betrayal. It was happening in our home, on her birthday, in the very space where we had built a life together. My gaze shifted, and I noticed the man's belongings scattered around. A phone, keys, and pieces of clothing that weren't mine. The anger that had simmered in the pit of my stomach erupted. I acted on impulse, grabbing his things and heading to the driveway. With hands fueled by rage, I doused the clothes with charcoal starter fluid and set them ablaze. Watching the flames consume them gave me a fleeting sense of satisfaction, but it did nothing to dull the pain gnawing at my insides. As I walked back into the house, the chaos I had unleashed caught up to me. My wife stood there, a towel clutched around her body, her face a mix of shock and panic. Tears welled up in her eyes as she took in the scene. I met her gaze, and with a voice laced with bitterness, I wished her a happy birthday. She started to cry, but her tears only deepened my resentment. Moments later, the other man appeared, equally disheveled and wrapped in a towel. The reality of what I was facing became clearer as I handed him his phone and keys and ordered him to leave. My wife pleaded, "Please don't do this to him," as if protecting him was her first instinct. The words cut through me like a knife. What about defending our marriage? Her betrayal was raw, and her loyalty to this stranger over her own husband felt like an added layer of cruelty. When she moved to get him a pair of trousers, I made it clear that he'd get nothing from me. In the heat of the moment, he tried to grab my arm, a foolish move that unleashed the fury boiling inside me. I hit him, my fists connecting with a force I didn't know I had until he was on the ground, eyes red and already swelling. I turned to my wife, who was sobbing, and told her to leave. It was her birthday, but that didn't matter anymore. She walked out, and I watched her go, the woman I had loved for 16 years now a stranger. She moved in with her mother, a woman who had her own history of infidelity, a cruel irony that wasn't lost on me. In the days that followed, I barely spoke to her. My phone buzzed endlessly with her calls and messages, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. It was too painful, too raw. I broke the news to our daughter, doing my best to shield her from the worst of it, but the hurt was evident in her eyes. She was angry and confused, and her mother's actions shattered the trust she'd had in her. The pain didn't subside, and each passing day felt like a struggle to stay composed. I knew I had to take control of the situation for the sake of my daughter and my own sanity. That's when I made the decision to hire a lawyer and initiate divorce proceedings. The moment felt heavy, a point of no return, but it also carried a sense of resolve. I needed to reclaim my life, to step away from the betrayal that had torn through our home. After days of ignoring my wife's pleas and messages, I finally reached out and arranged to meet her in a neutral place, a local coffee shop. My heart pounded as I walked in, unsure of what I wanted to hear, but knowing that I needed answers. I placed my phone on the table and hit record, the small red light a silent witness to our conversation. Her face was drawn, eyes swollen from what seemed like days of crying. She began by asking why I was doing this, as if my actions needed justifying. The question stunned me, but I pushed past it, telling her that I couldn't trust her anymore. She tried to explain that she wanted to save our marriage, that she had felt disconnected and lost, but now realized the value of what she had thrown away. Her words sounded hollow, rehearsed. I told her it was too late for that. Tears streamed down her face as she asked if I was really willing to throw away 16 years of marriage. I shot back that it wasn't me who had thrown it away, it was her. I demanded to know who the other man was. She told me he was a stay-at-home dad from one of the homeschooling programs, a casual acquaintance who had turned into something far more destructive. When I asked how long the affair had been going on, she admitted it had been 2 months. Her attempts to appear remorseful only deepened my resentment. She insisted she had felt guilty, that she was planning to end things before I found out. I scoffed at the lie, telling her that the only thing she regretted was getting caught. I asked for her phone, half expecting her to have erased everything, but surprisingly she hadn't. She showed me the texts, from the initial flirtations to the detailed plans of their meetups. Each message felt like a knife, cutting into whatever resolve I had left. I pressed further, asking why she could share certain aspects of herself with him but not with me. She looked down, ashamed, and whispered that she didn't want me to look at her differently for her desires. The absurdity of it made me angry. I told her I wouldn't have judged her, that her assumptions and cowardice had cost us everything. She showed me the text she had sent him, saying they couldn't see each other anymore. It felt empty, too little, too late. I made it clear that I wouldn't force our daughter to speak to her. That relationship was for them to mend, and I wouldn't stand in the way or push it. I told her that if she wanted any hope of moving forward, she needed counseling, serious counseling, because there was something profoundly broken inside her. Leaving the coffee shop, I felt a hollow ache, but also a strange sense of finality. I had given her a deadline of 60 days before the separation papers would be filed and insisted that she get an STD test. Even though the marriage was effectively over, I wanted to know that there were no further repercussions for me or our daughter. I demanded full transparency on her part, tracking her whereabouts, regular check-ins. The trust was gone, and this was the only way I could maintain any semblance of control until the divorce was finalized. In the days that followed, she spiraled further. On Christmas Eve, she attempted to take a drastic step by overdosing on pills. The emergency room visit that night left our daughter even more traumatized, solidifying my decision. I knew there was no salvaging this marriage. Her selfish actions had ripped apart our family, and I couldn't let her manipulation and instability continue to affect our lives. The days after Christmas were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. The emotional fallout from my wife's actions, and her reckless decision to take pills, cast a shadow over what should have been a season of warmth and togetherness. It further traumatized our daughter, solidifying that my decision to end the marriage was the only way forward. I sat her down and made it clear that our marriage was over and that her behavior had consequences far beyond just us. It was about protecting our daughters' well-being and finding a path where we could heal, free from the pain she had inflicted. With my soon-to-be ex-wife staying at her mother's house, communication became minimal. She was a ghost of herself, holed up and isolated, abandoned by the friends and family who knew what she had done. It was hard to feel sympathy. The person I once loved was now a stranger, and any attempt she made to reach out felt empty, fueled more by guilt and fear than genuine remorse. I decided to reach out to the other betrayed spouse, Maria. I felt compelled to tell her everything I had uncovered and share the evidence I had gathered. The meeting was a sobering moment. We sat across from each other, two people who had been blindsided by betrayal, piecing together the story of deceit. She revealed that when her husband came home with a black eye and a flimsy story about a road rage incident, she had sensed something was wrong but hadn't known the extent of it. Hearing the full truth from me confirmed her worst fears. Maria called her husband while I was there and told him not to come home. It was a moment that felt both vindicating and heartbreaking. We talked for nearly an hour, processing our mutual betrayal and finding a strange comfort in knowing we weren't alone in our pain. The next morning, she reached out to me, expressing her desire to involve her divorce attorney, as she was also preparing to end her marriage. The solidarity between us felt like a lifeline amidst the chaos. The divorce proceedings with my wife were straightforward. We agreed on an uncontested divorce, with the assets being split 60-40 in my favor. I would keep the house and I retained full custody of our daughter. Conversations with my wife were minimal and strictly about practical matters, divorce details and arrangements for our daughter. Any attempts she made to discuss the affair or express her remorse were shut down. I couldn't give her the satisfaction of thinking there was any hope of reconciliation. I followed through on everything I said, the counseling requirement, the transparency of her movements, and ensuring she adhered to the stipulations I laid out. The trust was shattered, and I knew any semblance of control was essential until the legal process was complete. 6 months passed, and the divorce was finalized. The sense of freedom I felt was mixed with an ache that hadn't yet healed. But amidst the pain, life moved forward. Maria and I continued to keep in touch, finding solace in each other's company. We shared a bond forged from betrayal and the determination to rebuild our lives. Though I didn't rush into anything romantic, we found comfort in being there for each other. Over time, our connection deepened, not out of a shared trauma, but from genuinely enjoying each other's presence. It felt strange to open my heart again, but Maria's understanding and kindness made it possible. We started dating slowly, respecting the time we both needed to heal. Now, years later, I look back on that tumultuous period with clarity. The betrayal that shattered my life was painful, but it led me to a place where I could rebuild stronger and wiser. I learned that trust, once broken, takes immense strength to mend, but it's possible to find peace and even love again. As for my daughter, she's grown stronger too, finding ways to move forward without being defined by the trauma. She knows that life isn't perfect and that people can let you down, but she also knows that resilience runs deep in our family. The past is now a chapter closed, and while its lessons remain, they no longer define my story. I'm moving forward step by step, with hope and a renewed sense of purpose. Dear listener, if you've made it this far, thank you for being a part of my story. If you found any part of this helpful or relatable, please consider subscribing. Your support means everything as we continue to share and learn from each other's experiences.